It starts with a sound you almost don't hear. Maybe it's the creak of fabric under strain, or the crunch of packed snow beneath your boots, or maybe it's just the mountain breathing. Either way, it's quiet here, too quiet. You're standing at the edge of the known world, the Ural Mountains of Soviet Russia stretching out before you in endless waves of white and rock. It's February 1959, a time when few people dared venture into this kind of wild. 9 young hikers did, and they didn't come back. Honestly, when I first read this story, I had to pause and just sit with it for a while. There was something so off, so eerie, not in a loud, gory way, but in that slow creeping, under your skin kind of way, like reading someone's last diary entry and realizing they knew more than they wrote down. If this kind of story hits you, like it hit me, consider subscribing and, hey, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from, or just say hi. I read them all, even the weird ones. All right, now let's slow things down and step into tonight's journey together. You step where they stepped. 9 students and graduates from the Ural Polytechnic Institute, young, clever, experienced in winter expeditions, embarked on a skiing and hiking trip into the Ural Mountains. Their leader, Igor Dyatlov, just 23, meticulous, calm, the kind of guy who brings extra socks and a backup compass, just in case. They were aiming to reach a peak called a Torten, which in the local Mansai language means don't go there. Cheery name, but that didn't bother them. This wasn't their first rodeo. They planned carefully, logging their route, packing supplies, and even agreeing to send a telegram once they returned to civilization. Only the telegram never came. You pause and look around. All that's left now is snow and stillness. But if you squint hard enough, you can almost see them laughing by the campfire, scribbling journal entries, snapping photos with a camera you now wish you had in your hand. They were normal, alive, human, and then they vanished. Search teams didn't head out immediately. Delays in communication, bad weather, and a healthy dose of Soviet bureaucracy slowed the process. But when people finally started looking, they were met with confusion and then horror. You reach the first site, the tent, half buried in snow, pitched at an odd angle on the slope of a mountain called Kholat Syakhl, another Mansi term. This one means Mountain of the Dead. Seriously, the naming committee really outdid themselves. The tent tells you a story you weren't prepared for. It's been cut open, not from the outside, as if a bear had tried to claw in. No, from the inside, as if the hikers had slashed their way out in a panic and left without their boots, without their coats. In 30 days temperatures, you trail behind them now, barefoot in your mind, following the shallow impressions left in the snow. They moved in pairs, stumbled, some tried to crawl. You pass a tree with broken branches up high, suggesting someone tried to climb it for safety, to see something, to get away from something. Mainstream historians agree this part is real documented. The footprints, the tree, the tent. But that's where the certainty ends and the mystery begins. The first bodies are found not far from the tree. 2 men, dressed only in underwear, lying by the remains of a fire. Their hands are burned, as if they desperately tried to keep warm, or clung too long to flames that were never enough. Others are found scattered nearby, One appears to have died mid-run. Another lies, face down in the snow, bloodied, as if something or someone struck him hard. You shiver, not from the cold, but from the sensations that you're not alone. That same feeling they might have had. Something just off, like the forest is holding its breath. There's a photo, one of the last ever taken. It shows them all, smiling, bundled up and carefree. And then there's another darker, blurrier, showing a shadowy figure in the trees. Some say it's just one of the hikers. Others aren't so sure. Fringe researchers love this part. They talk about ancient curses, Mansi spirits, and creatures that stalk the snows. But you can't help wondering why the clean footprints, why no signs of a struggle inside the tent. Why did experienced hikers, people trained to handle cold, fear, and emergency run like frightened animals into a deadly night? Historians still argue whether the panic was triggered by an internal breakdown psychosis, group hysteria, or something external, an avalanche, a sonic boom, something no one was meant to see. The trees don't answer. You bend down and scoop some snow. It squeaks between your fingers, light and crystalline. Imagine being out here with no shoes, no light, nothing but white stretching for miles. Your breath crystallizing in front of you, your lungs burning, and yet you keep running. One of the hikers had a journal. In it, they joked about a creature they called the snowman. Haha, right, except now you can't shake the image. Something tall, watching, waiting. And here's the kicker, a detail almost always left out of the mainstream retellings. A 13th photograph, recovered from one of the cameras, possibly snapped in panic. It's dark, unclear, a blur of white, a streak of light, but some say it looks like eyes. You laugh it off, softly, because otherwise you won't sleep tonight. Near the base of the slope, you find the last piece of evidence, for now a makeshift den built under the snow, branches arranged for shelter. Whoever made it tried to survive, but they didn't make it. Their hands were raw, their clothes some stripped from the others, not violently, but desperately. One wore 2 pairs of pants, another had her foot wrapped in fabric, torn from a jacket. And that's when you realize whatever happened up there, it tore apart more than just their bodies. You turn back toward the tent, still there, still silent. The slashed flap flutters slightly in the wind, and you wonder if you were in that tent, asleep, warm, safe, and then woke up to something. Would you run barefoot into the cold too? You don't have to answer now, but keep walking. The story's just getting started. You blink against the cold. Your breath fogs, and for a moment, it feels like you're there, really there, standing just outside the torn tent, looking at those long, jagged slashes, fabric flaps in the wind like tired lungs exhaling. But it's not the outside that's cut, it's the inside, and that makes all the difference. Let's get something straight. Experienced hikers don't casually destroy their only shelter in sub-zero weather. The Dyatlov group, seasoned in winter survival, would have known that abandoning their tent meant courting death. So why tear through it instead of calmly unzipping or unlacing the flap? You crawl inside, metaphorically, careful not to disturb what's left. Personal belongings are scattered, but oddly neat boots arranged, a flask still sealed, a camera set aside, like the tent was abandoned in a rush, but not by people planning to never return. They left behind warm clothes, food, even a portable stove they just set up. Who does that? You lie on your side like they might have, staring at the nylon ceiling just inches from your nose. It's quiet. Then comes the noise snap, maybe a branch cracking pop pop, like footsteps through crusted snow, a whistle or a scream. What makes someone slice through a tent from the inside and sprint nearly naked into 30-30 winds? Some investigators claimed it must have been an avalanche. That's the official story, or at least it was for decades. But there's a problem. Actually, several. First off, no classic avalanche signs were found, no debris field, no distinct path of tumbling snow. The tent, remarkably, was still partially standing, stakes in the ground, poles upright, personal items untouched. If a wall of snow had hit that tent, you'd expect carnage, a collapsed shelter, chaos, not a strangely intact little home with a few eerie slashes. You crawl back out. There's another theory, and it's weirder. Some scientists later proposed katabatic wind, a rare but fierce weather phenomenon where sudden, powerful winds cascade down slopes, generating terrifying noise and pressure, enough to frighten you into thinking something huge is bearing down, enough to make you run. Imagine it a sound so deep it presses against your bones, your ears ringing, your skin crawling, maybe even hallucinating. It's called infrasound sound waves below the threshold of human hearing. Some say the tent's shape and slope angle could have created this vibration, like nature's own panic button. Still, that's just one theory, and the Soviet investigators in 1959 didn't list hallucination as a cause of death. Their actual conclusion: something chillingly vague, an unknown compelling force. That's it. That's all they said. Like signing a blank check and sliding it across the desk. You trace the footprints again. They stretch out from the tent like scattered thoughts. Some prints are clear bare feet, socks, light shoes, no drag marks, no signs of pursuit, just calm, walking steps that eventually stagger. And then the cedar tree, towering, lonely, like an accidental witness, its scarred branches broken high up. Investigators believed someone climbed it, maybe to look for the others, maybe to hide, or maybe to escape something already in the snow with them. You look up into the tree's gnarled arms. It doesn't speak, but under it, you find the first two bodies, Doroshenko and Krivonishenko, barefoot, burned palms, grayish-purple skin, their faces locked in what you swear looks like terror. The campfire between them burned weakly, consuming branches too small and sparse to last long. You touch a log in your mind, and it crumbles like ash. How long did they survive out here? An hour. 2. One quirky detail you can't ignore. One of them bit his knuckle, deeply. Some say it was to stifle a scream. You start noticing patterns. Their deaths didn't happen all at once. Some died quickly. Others moved further into the trees. And some of the injuries, they don't make sense. Take Rustem Slobodin. He had a skull fracture, but no external wound. Doctors said it wasn't fatal, but combined with hypothermia, it sealed his fate. He was found face down, heading back toward the tent, still trying to return, still thinking he could fix this. That gets you. The idea that even as the cold clamped around his heart, his only thought was to go back, back to warmth, back to the others. But the deeper you go, the darker it gets. Literally, you follow the trail to a small ravine. It's where they found the last 4 hikers months later, after the snow melted. These weren't peaceful deaths. No, these were injuries. You hesitate before looking. 3 had massive chest fractures. 1 had her skull crushed. But there were no signs of external trauma, no bruising, no cuts, like the damage came from the inside out. One expert said the force required was comparable to a car crash. Another detail, Lyudmila Dubinina was missing her tongue and her eyes. No animal tracks, no blood trail, just absence, just silence. Historians still argue whether her tongue was torn out by scavengers or something else. The position of her body, face down in a stream, leads some to believe it decomposed naturally in the water. But others, they whisper about something darker. Radiation, that's another breadcrumb. Some of the clothing from the ravine group had traces of radiation, low level, but detectable, enough to raise eyebrows and questions. Where would that come from? Military weapons testing? Or maybe one of them brought something with them. A sample, a relic, a secret. You catch yourself breathing faster. Let's dial it back. Here's a mundane but spooky theory, a combination of snow load stress, paradoxical undressing a hypothermia phenomenon, where victims feel hot and strip, and disorientation. Add in exhaustion, darkness, and panic, and yeah, maybe that explains it. But here's where it doesn't add up if they panicked. Why no sign of struggle in the tent? Why leave so much behind? And why the calm? Orderly footprints. It's like they chose to walk into death. Together, you sit now beneath the tree, snow falling in thick flakes. They knew each other well. Friends, some in love, some competitive, all intelligent. These weren't fools or thrill seekers. They were planners, survivors, and yet, one moment in that tent changed everything. So you stand, brushing imaginary snow from your coat. The tent's still there, the slashes gaping like wounds. The footprints, half filled with new snow, fade quickly. But this next part, it's about what others saw, or think they saw. Lights in the sky, secrets in the earth, things the official reports conveniently forgot to mention. But more on that. When you look up, you tilt your head back. The sky is wide, vast, and starless. Or maybe that's just cloud cover. But you know something's missing. The kind of night that feels too quiet. Like the stars are hiding for a reason. Locals, and even some of the rescue crews, reported seeing glowing orbs in the sky around the time the Dyatlov group went missing. Not once, but multiple nights. Orange spheres, moving slowly, sometimes hovering, sometimes darting off with purpose. You shift uncomfortably. Lights in the sky always sound like a fringe idea until you start cataloging the eyewitnesses, soldiers, pilots, local tribespeople, people with nothing to gain by making it up. One military report, quietly declassified decades later, mentioned aerial phenomena in the northern Urals that winter. It was scrubbed from the Dyatlov files, of course, because in 1959, Soviet Russia, the only thing more dangerous than curiosity was honesty. The Mansi people, indigenous to this region, called those lights Chotnanart, or fire from the sky. Their oral histories speak of sacred mountains and forbidden paths, some of which align eerily well with the hiker's route. You can't help wondering if the group stumbled into a place they shouldn't have. One particular story stands out, a Mansi tale of a cursed peak that glows when angered, usually dismissed as mythology. But the mountain they died on, that same one, Cholat Mountain of the Dead, you imagine it now, you're inside the tent, dozing. Suddenly, a faint glow spills through the thin fabric. You unzip it, look up, and see something hanging in the sky that doesn't belong. Not a plane, not a flare. Something older. You'd panic too. But here's where things get really odd. Several members of the search team noted that the hiker's skin had taken on a strange orange hue. Their hair, some described it as turning grayish or lightly bleached. Now, sure, prolonged exposure to the cold, the elements, even post-mortem changes can do weird things to the body. But all 9 of them? And then there's the clothing. As mentioned earlier, certain garments, especially from the 4 found in the ravine, tested positive for radiation. Not a lot, but just enough to raise eyebrows. The kind of trace that makes you whisper instead of speak aloud. One fringe theory takes shape here. What if they weren't just hikers? What if one or more of them were carrying something sensitive, something that needed to disappear? You laugh it off, kind of, like when someone suggests lizard people run the government, and you're like, haha, unless, still, there's another layer. Zolotaryov, one of the hikers, wasn't a student. He was much older, a veteran, decorated. Why did he join the trip so suddenly, replacing a member who dropped out last minute? And why was he carrying a camera that no one remembered packing? Historians still argue whether this was coincidence or something else, a tag-along or a plant. You sift through his belongings in your mind. Among the photos later developed from his camera, several are touristy, goofy, but only one seems off, blurry, angled, shadowy. No one can say exactly what it is, but it's not of the group. It's not a landscape. Some say it shows lights or eyes. Back to those lights, multiple independent reports confirm the glowing orbs. On February 31st, the night the hikers fled people from the nearby town of Ivdel, and even military installations to the south saw orange. Hovering objects moving unnaturally across the sky. Some wrote it off as rocket tests. But here's the thing. Official Soviet records show no such tests were scheduled in that region on that day, which leads to 2 possibilities. One, they were launched off the books, a black project gone sideways, and the hikers witnessed something they shouldn't have. 2, it wasn't Soviet at all. You raise an eyebrow, not because you're sold on aliens, but because you're human. You like neat boxes, logical endings, but nothing about this case fits one. If it was a test, maybe chemical or sonic weapons were involved. Something designed to disorient, create fear. Perhaps they were testing a prototype that never made it to the battlefield. Something that emits infrasound or a non-lethal radiation field. It worked a little too well. Maybe the Dyatlov group was collateral damage. Soviet files on the incident were sealed almost immediately. When the families pushed for details, they were met with silence. Mysteriously, some of the hikers' journals and camera rolls vanished before the rest were returned, and the injuries still don't match an avalanche. One expert said their broken ribs looked like they'd been hit by a car. But where's the vehicle? Where are the tire tracks? The impact craters? It's like something immense but invisible crushed them. You pause, snow whispering around your ankles, and imagine a military drone. No, too early for that. A shockwave, a sonic boom, a directed energy weapon, or maybe something simpler, a weaponized lie. The Soviet Union had motive to cover up mistakes, especially if foreign tech, military mishaps, or secret operations were involved. One idea suggests that parachute mines dropped and detonated mid-air might explain the internal trauma without external wounds. They detonate above ground, creating intense shock waves. A secret test of those mines could explain the glowing orbs, the panic, even the radiation. But then again, it could explain nothing, because there's always that human layer, the kind you can't model or reverse engineer, like the fact that Dubinina, despite missing her tongue, was found with her fists clenched around a piece of cloth, not from her own clothing, but someone else's. As if trying to hold on, you breathe in. The air is colder here, thinner. Maybe it's just the altitude, or maybe it's the weight of too many secrets pressing down. The Soviet government closed the case after only a few months, labeled classified, then archived. The families never got real answers, just grief and closed doors. Years later, when journalists reopened the files, they discovered inconsistencies, redactions, pages missing. One investigator even claimed to have been told not to dig too deep, that some truths were better frozen. You look up again at the empty sky. If there were lights, if there was something unnatural in the air that night, well, it's gone now. Or maybe it's still out there, waiting for the right kind of silence, the kind that presses against your eardrums, that hums just beneath hearing, the kind that makes you forget your name, your breath, your feet in the snow. You're not ready to turn away yet, not until we descend further into what the state didn't say, the files that vanished, and the footsteps that didn't belong to the hikers, because some tracks, they didn't match any of their boots. You crouch, brushing frost off the faint indentation in the snow, a footprint, but the size is wrong, too wide, too shallow, and it doesn't match any of the boots recovered from the Dyatlov hikers. It's just there, sitting quietly, leading nowhere. The search teams mentioned this, almost like an afterthought. Other tracks, vague, not detailed. Some say barefoot, others larger than any of the 9 would have made. And then, nothing. They just vanish, as if lifted mid-step, gone without melting, smeared, or continued descent. You run your fingers over the print in your mind, over and over, because it doesn't make sense. And whenever something doesn't make sense in this case, it tends to get ignored, left to fade in the wind. But what if that's exactly where the truth is hiding? Let's pause for a second and rewind the scene back to the very beginning of the rescue effort. February 26th, the searchers reached the Dyatlov tent, slashed from the inside, empty, half buried in snow. Scattered belongings, boots, food, diaries, but no bodies, not yet. Then the first tracks are found, leading from the tent, downhill, soft, meandering, some barefoot, some in socks, some just in one shoe. No signs of running, no blood, no struggle. And amid those 1 or 2 stray prints that seem out of place, as if someone or something else had been there too, walking alone or watching. Of course, no official reports confirm this. The files are clean, too clean, the kind of clean that suggests someone holding the mop too tightly. You shift your weight. The air feels heavier here, doesn't it? The lead investigator, Lev Ivanov, later confessed something troubling, decades after the event. When he was finally allowed to speak more freely, he admitted being pressured to close the case prematurely, to ignore certain findings. One of those findings, tree branches above the ravine where 4 of the hikers were found, had been broken, snapped, high up, as if someone climbed them in a panic, or as if something had landed in them. He also reported that despite sub-zero temperatures, certain parts of the area showed signs of minor heat exposure, scorch marks, disturbed topsoil. When he tried to document this, his notes were confiscated. He was told to focus on the hikers, not the sky. Historians still argue whether this points to a cover-up or just sloppy forensics. After all, Soviet authorities weren't known for transparency, especially when it came to anything that smelled like a state secret. But Ivanov's unease never left him. In interviews, he referred to a presence around the case, something intangible, something off. You look up again. Snowflakes swirl, slow and hypnotic, but your mind's still stuck on those stray prints. One Mansi hunter claimed, quietly, that he'd seen those prints before, not in snow but in ash, near a different mountain, one he never returned to. He wouldn't say more. Now let's talk about what was found near the cedar tree. This part still haunts people. You can feel it settling in your chest. The 2 Yuris Krivonishenko and Doroshenko were found beneath that tree. In their underwear, no shoes, skin blackened by cold. Their hands had been stripped raw, scraped down to bone in some places. They'd climbed the cedar, high, higher than you'd expect from someone half frozen. Branches snapped at least 15 feet above the ground, fingernails embedded in bark. It wasn't just a climb, it was a scramble, a panicked, flailing ascent, like they were trying to get away from something below, or get a better look at something above, near them. Scraps of skin, burn marks on the snow, a partial flashlight dead, but with no damage. And this is subtle, but unsettling, a small pile of fir needles arranged in a circle. No one mentioned that in official files, but it's in a photo. Background detail, always overlooked. Then a few hundred meters away, 3 more bodies. Dyatlov himself, Slobodin, Kolmogorova, all lying in a line, as if they were trying to get back to the tent, as if they changed their minds. Kolmogorova's face was contorted, frozen mid-scream. Her fists were bruised, not from falling, from fighting, but not each other. Slobodin had a skull fracture, blunt force, no surrounding tissue damage, which suggests it was sustained right before or after death without bleeding. Then there's the ravine, 4 bodies, partially buried under snow. Months passed before they were found. When they were, rescue teams recoiled. This was different. Rib cages caved in, eyes missing, tongue gone, internal injuries, like car crash victims, yet no external trauma. It's almost surgical, clean, detached. Some speculate an avalanche. Others suggest hypothermia-induced madness. But the position of the bodies suggests none of them tried to shield themselves. No defensive wounds, no bracing. It's as if whatever crushed them came from inside the air. Maybe a shock wave. Maybe worse, Zolotaryov was found with a camera around his neck. Not a hiking camera, a compact, high sensitivity model, military grade. The film was fogged, damaged. Only one photo recoverable. That strange blur you remember? The one that makes your stomach twist. One fringe researcher claims that blur matches the plasma signature of a high-altitude electrical discharge similar to ball lightning. Another says, it's just a fluke of frost on the lens. Still, there's a weird vibe to that image, like it's watching you back. You take a breath. You need to, because here's where it all gets weirder. Some of the clothes found on the ravine group were not originally theirs. A jacket that belonged to someone else. A piece of cloth tied like a sling, though no one had a matching wound. Items moved, swapped, reused. This isn't unusual when fighting for warmth. Sure, but the timeline doesn't support that theory. Not entirely. It's as if they were preparing for something else, or had been interrupted mid-plan. Back in the files, one searcher's diary private, not official, mentions the unnerving silence in the ravine, like walking into a vacuum. No birds, no breeze, just dead air. He wrote, "It felt wrong to breathe there, and he wasn't alone. The rescue dogs, usually dependable, refused to enter that area. They whimpered and sat down, barked at shadows. One even tried to bite its handler. That dog was later removed from the site." Historians argue whether this suggests electromagnetic interference, a gas pocket, or sheer animal intuition. But you can't help thinking about all those myths about cursed places, silent zones, and spots on Earth that don't follow the same rules as everywhere else. Kolachachals, Mountain of the Dead. Maybe it wasn't a metaphor. You close your eyes for a moment, just long enough to picture it all again. The tent, the forest, the bodies, misplaced and misnamed. And then the prints, the extra steps, the unexplained presence. One step too many, one footprint too large, and the whisper in your ear, asking who else was up there that night. You open your eyes again, but it still doesn't feel like you've left the ravine. There's a strange echo that hangs in the space around this part of the story, like something doesn't want to be forgotten, or maybe like it never left. You've traced the tent, the footprints, the broken bodies, but now it's time to move past what was found and look at what was hidden, not by nature, but by people. You feel it, don't you? That tug of paranoia, that little twist in your gut that says, this wasn't just a tragic accident. Now imagine you're a young Soviet investigator, notebook in hand, pen twitching nervously between your fingers. The year is 1959. The Cold War is colder than the Ural Mountains, and you've just been flown into a mystery that makes your skin itch. Officially, you're here to document a case of misadventure. Unofficially, you're starting to realize your job might be less about uncovering the truth and more about burying it. Because here's the thing, from almost the moment the hikers were declared missing, this was not treated like a normal rescue operation. The first rescue teams were volunteers, students, friends, ski instructors, people who cared. But as soon as the first few bodies were found, the tone shifted. The military was called in. Helicopters arrived. Secretive men in thick coats appeared without names, asking too many questions and giving none back. And they weren't just observing, they were taking the hikers' belongings, taking the camera film, taking the diaries. Some items were never seen again. Others returned, altered, or stripped of anything useful. You lean closer, as if someone might overhear even now. Let's talk about those diaries. Several of the hikers kept journals, routine, at first cheerful, even descriptions of snowball fights, inside jokes, warm meals. Then, oddly, the entries start getting stilted, shorter. Some lines feel unfinished, like the writer stopped mid-thought. And then they just stop altogether. The last page. It's more like a code than an entry. Now we know snowmen exist. A joke? Maybe, but it's written in a completely different tone. No smiley face, no doodle, just that cold, dangling sentence. Historians still argue whether this was just a bit of dry humor or a veiled reference to something unsettling they'd seen. Some pages were missing entirely by the time the journals were submitted into evidence, torn out, scrubbed clean, redacted with the precision of someone who knew exactly what not to leave behind. Then there's the camera footage, what little of it remains. The most famous roll, from one of the personal cameras, shows smiling faces, snow-covered hills, and one peculiar image. Photo just to a 17. It's blurry, indistinct, a burst of light, or maybe a figure, or maybe nothing. But it was the last photo on that roll. And get this, one of the cameras recovered from the hikers wasn't even listed on the group's inventory. No one ever claimed it. A small device, found on Zolotaryov's body, with a type of film not typically sold to civilians. It went missing soon after being logged. You starting to feel it now, that gap, that shadow in the records. There's more. A witness, an elderly woman from a nearby village, claimed she saw strange lights over the mountains the night of the incident. Bright, spherical, moving silently across the sky. She said it looked like the sun rising in the wrong place. Others corroborated this: farmers, hunters, even one weather station technician who jotted it into the margins of a report. That technician was transferred within weeks, his logs revised. But those lights weren't unique to this night. The area around Kolatchakal had reported similar aerial phenomena for years. Glowing orbs, pulsing beams, objects that moved against the wind. It was even rumored that Soviet missile tests took place in the region. But no official documents support that, unless you count the ones that suddenly disappeared. And here's where it gets twisty. Shortly after the Dyatlov case was closed, the entire region was sealed off for years. No hikers, no journalists, no one in or out, just snow and silence. They said it was for environmental concerns. Sure, and now, let's dig a little deeper. Have you ever heard of the parachute mine theory? It's one of the more grounded alternatives. At least on the surface, it suggests that Soviet military forces were testing aerial mines devices that descend slowly on parachutes and detonate above the ground. Such a blast could explain the internal injuries without external trauma. It could explain the burns. It could even account for the panic, the disorientation, the abandonment of the tent. But here's the catch: if it was a military accident, there would have been traces, metal fragments, craters, radioactivity. Oh wait, that's the thing. One of the hikers' clothes was radioactive, Just a trace, but enough to raise eyebrows, especially since two of the group had previously worked in nuclear facilities. So now the rumor mill spins even faster. Was this a weapons test gone wrong? Were the hikers in the wrong place at the wrong time? Did they stumble across something they weren't supposed to see? Some even whisper that the hikers were spies, that the expedition wasn't just a ski trip, it was a cover. A few fringe theorists point to Zolotaryov again, the older man, tattooed, mysterious, a veteran. Some of his tattoos were in a code used by certain Soviet intelligence units. One word in particular, Dyatlov, still unsolved. No one knows what it means. Maybe not even Zolotaryov. You look down at your hands. You realize they've clenched without you noticing. The story's getting under your skin now, because what haunts you isn't just what happened, but how hard someone worked to make sure no one would ever find out. When the investigation ended, the official cause of death, an unknown compelling force. That's it. Vague, empty. Designed to close the book without answering a single real question. Years later, when journalists tried to reopen the case, they found missing files, blacked out names, unpublished photographs. Even the search teams were told not to talk to reporters. Not then, not now. One of them, in his 80s, finally agreed to speak in a low voice over the phone. He said, "We weren't supposed to find them, and when we did, we weren't supposed to ask how." That phrase sticks with you, and still, people try, year after year. The story pulls in more eyes. Filmmakers, students, scientists, skeptics, everyone hoping to find the overlooked clue, the smoking gun, the sliver of truth. But maybe the real clue isn't in what's been found, but in what's been erased. So now you ask yourself, if this was really just an accident, why erase anything at all? You sit back, letting that question settle like snowfall, quiet, heavy, still. And just when you think you've reached the end of this rabbit hole, you remember something. That last photo, the blur, the glare, was that the last thing they ever saw? Your breath slows, but your heart doesn't. You're lying in your bed, covers pulled up to your chin, yet somehow you feel like you're back in the Ural Mountains watching, waiting, surrounded by snow and secrets. Let's peel back another layer. So far, you've followed the official trail, the evidence, the files, the fragments of truth that were allowed to survive. But now, you drift into the zone where logic starts to unravel and folklore seeps in through the cracks. You're about to walk that narrow path between sanity and something else, where the plausible tiptoes into the impossible. Because here's the thing, when official answers feel hollow, people start building their own. The Dyatlov Pass incident isn't just a historical mystery. It's become a magnet for theories, all kinds, some with careful logic. Others, well, let's just say they stretch further than a Siberian winter. You might have heard whispers of the Yeti theory. Yeah, that one. It's easy to laugh off at first. Giant ape man, footprints in the snow, hikers attacked in the night. But if you squint a little, there are some strange nuggets here. That last journal line, now we know snowmen exist. Not yetis, not bears, snowmen. Odd phrasing. Right. Then there's the condition of the bodies. Massive chest injuries, yet soft tissue relatively untouched. Arms twisted, tongue missing. One hiker's eyes gone. Could that happen in an avalanche? Sure, but could it also happen if something ripped into them? Something that doesn't leave clean surgical marks, but something brute. And one thing often overlooked: the bodies weren't scattered like they were flung by nature. They were grouped, some trying to return to the tent, others huddled in the forest. It feels strategic, like they were being hunted. Historians still argue whether the snowman entry was a joke, a misdirection, or a desperate clue. Some Russian locals refer to a being called the Menk, a kind of forest giant said to roam the northern mountains. It's less Bigfoot, more ancient guardian, not evil, not kind, just territorial. Sound ridiculous, maybe, but so does a tongue vanishing from a frozen body without a trace of animal interference. Still, you shrug it off. You're rational, right? Good, because the next theory gets weirder. Let's talk about infrasound. It's a real phenomenon, sound waves below the threshold of human hearing, often caused by natural forces like wind moving through mountains or around dome-shaped structures. In 2003, researcher Donnie Icar proposed that a specific kind of wind phenomenon, called the Kármán vortex street, could have occurred at Dyatlov Pass. Basically, strong gusts whip around the slopes and create tiny, repeating pressure waves. You don't hear them, but your body feels them. They can trigger anxiety, paranoia, physical discomfort, even hallucinations. Some people describe it like being watched by a predator that's just out of sight. Imagine you're in that tent. It's flapping. Snow builds. The wind howls in a pattern your brain doesn't recognize, but your instincts do. Suddenly, someone panics, then another. You all bolt from the tent, irrational but terrified. You run half-dressed into the snow, thinking you're escaping danger, but you're running into it. One of you falls, another breaks something on a rock in the dark, and when it's all over, no one's left to explain. Ichar's theory has gained traction. It's clean, scientific, no need for monsters or conspiracies. But even it doesn't explain the radiation, or the missing items, or why the military arrived so fast. Still, it gives you a chill, doesn't it? The idea that your body could be tricked into fear by something you can't hear, like being haunted by air. Now take a deep breath, because here comes another curveball: the shrooms theory. No, really. Some folks believe the hikers may have accidentally ingested wild mushrooms, either by eating local forage or brewing contaminated tea. Siberian mushrooms can contain powerful psychoactive compounds known to trigger hallucinations, paranoia, even violent reactions. Picture it: a group, exhausted, freezing, making tea over a small stove. One eats a little mushroom cap that looked like something they knew. Another tries it. Within an hour, things start to break down. Someone laughs hysterically. Someone else screams about shadows outside the tent. Someone begins tearing at the canvas. Disoriented and afraid, they flee into the snow. In that state, they might fall from a ravine without knowing it, bite their own tongue, strip off clothes in a moment of paradoxical undressing, where hypothermia tricks the body into thinking it's burning up. But here's the thing: there were no mushrooms found at the site, no trace in their stomachs, at least according to the autopsies we're allowed to see. And wouldn't trained hikers know better? Then again, panic doesn't ask for credentials. Others push the theory further. saying the mushrooms were part of shamanic rituals, that maybe the hikers stumbled across something sacred, something not meant to be witnessed, a buried site, a rite in progress. The locals rarely travel that high for a reason, and they call the mountain Kolat, Shackle Dead Mountain. But that name is often mistranslated. It likely refers to a lack of game, not ghosts. Still, doesn't stop the chill from crawling up your spine. Now, for the fringe of the fringe time slip theory. It sounds like science fiction, but some believe that the hikers entered a kind of temporal distortion, a thin place where reality bends. You've heard the stories. Planes vanishing in the Bermuda Triangle, people walking into a forest and never coming out. A glitch in time or space. Those who support this theory point to the mismatched times on the watches of the victims. 3 different watches were found, each stopped at a different hour, none of them matching the likely timeline of death. Coincidence? Maybe. Batteries dying at different moments. Or did something shift? A soft anomaly in the world. A wrinkle. Something that opened and then snapped shut. Too weirdest. But this whole story is weird. And sometimes, the weirdest theory is the only one that doesn't collapse under its own contradictions. But let's pull back for a moment. You're here, tucked in and safe, asking yourself, do any of these theories fully explain what happened? Not quite, because each one solves one piece of the puzzle, but never all of it. The footprints, the injuries, the radiation, the silence, the cover-up, the weird lights, the diary entries, the vanishing camera, the missing tongue, the overkill, the fear. It's like 9 people walked into the mountains, and each of them died in a different reality. So maybe you start to understand why this story won't leave people alone. Why even decades later, it's still gnawing at the edges of truth. And here's the part no one likes to say out loud. We may never know what really happened, because knowing requires clarity. And clarity doesn't live on that mountain. What lives there is snow, wind, silence, and questions that bite harder than the cold ever could. Next, we'll turn to those left behind the families. The searchers, the ones who still lie awake, wondering what really happened. But first, that phrase echoes again in your mind. Now we know snowmen exist. Do you? The storm has passed. The bodies have been found. But the story doesn't end when the snow stops falling. You're standing now not on the icy slope of Kolat Shachol, but in a quiet hallway in Sverdlovsk. Fluorescent lights hum overhead. A military officer's boots echo against linoleum. Outside, it's spring, but in the hearts of the families who've just been told their children are never coming home, winter is permanent, because what happens next, after the search parties, after the zippered body bags, isn't closure, it's silence. You watch as Lyudmila Dubinina's father slams his fist on the hospital wall. He's just seen her body. He says her injuries don't match the official story. He says her body wasn't just bruised, it was mutilated. And he's right, but no one listens. You sit beside Zina Kolmogorova's mother, who clutches a photo of her daughter like it's the last real thing in the world. Her daughter had written her letters bright, casual, full of hope. We're eating well. Spirits are high. Now she's buried under frozen earth. And Igor Dyatlov's sister, she'll spend decades writing letters to officials, begging for answers. She never stops. Not really. She even revisits the mountain later in life, trying to feel what her brother must have felt that night. The wind, the dread, the complete aloneness. Here's the part most people miss in these stories. Grief doesn't just linger, it infects. It seeps into memory and then into history. And if you live under a government that values silence over truth, that grief becomes something heavier. You might think, surely the Soviet state helped these families, gave them support, access, comfort. Nope. They got briefings, censored autopsies, and that most Soviet of gifts, the recommendation to keep quiet for the good of the country. Historians still argue whether the government's secrecy was meant to hide incompetence or something darker, but it's undeniable that what followed was a masterclass in suppression. Photographs vanished, entire rolls of film disappeared or were returned fogged, witness testimonies were redacted, and the case officially labeled a compelling natural force. Not very poetic, not very specific, but very useful if you want the questions to stop. The pass was closed for 3 years after the incident. Not for tourists, not for locals, just closed. Safety reasons. They said, you can decide what that means. Even the funerals were quiet affairs. Closed caskets, strict military presence. One account says that when the bodies arrived, their skin was deeply tanned, almost orange. Radiation burns exposure, or just post-mortem decay. No one's allowed to test the remains now, but of course, not everyone accepted the silence. In the 1990s, as the Soviet Union fell and the archives cracked open just a little, a fresh wave of amateur investigators poured in. Retired military, hikers, students, bloggers. They pieced together timelines, translated journals, and flew drones over the pass. One such name, Yuri Yudin, the only survivor of the Dyatlov group. Remember him? He was the one who turned back early, thanks to an inflamed sciatic nerve. At first, he felt lucky, but later, that luck felt like guilt. Yuri spent the rest of his life chasing the truth. He once said, "If I had a chance to ask God one question, it would be what really happened to my friends that night." He died in 2013, never got his answer, but some things did come to light, like the involvement of high-ranking Soviet figures in the case, strange delays in the official search, and, most chillingly, whispers from local Mansai tribespeople who claim to have seen lights in the sky around the time of the incident. UFOs, maybe, but before we drift off into that galaxy, let's talk about something even more human memory. You're walking now through a school gymnasium in Yekaterinburg, where a small memorial display has been set up. Grainy black and white photos line the walls. A torn hiking boot, a compass, a map with handwritten notes in the margins, and at the center 9 candles, each with a name. Tourists stop and stare, trying to stitch together the lives from scraps. But for some of the families, this is sacred ground. They come every year, lay down flowers, speak the names out loud. Even if the world has moved on, they haven't. You start to understand that the Dyatlov Pass incident isn't just a cold case, it's a living scar, the kind that flares up in strange weather, that wakes people at night with dreams of tents and whispers. In 2019, the Russian government reopened the case. New science, they said. Avalanche again. Nothing unusual. Move along. But by now, The official word is just noise, because once the world has felt mystery, it doesn't go back to trusting paper trails. And maybe that's the real legacy of Dyatlov, not the tragedy, but the way it taught people to question, to notice patterns, to ask why the footprints end where they do, why the evidence seems edited, why truth was treated like contraband. It became more than just a story. It became a mirror, because deep down, you're not just trying to figure out what killed those 9 hikers. You're trying to answer something quieter, something you can't quite ask aloud. What would I have done? Would I have run from the tent? Would I have made it to the forest? Would I have gone back for my friends? And that's why you're still here hours later, lights off, eyes wide open, not because of the theories, not even the fear, but because something in you recognizes something in them. The pursuit, the thrill, the love of nature and of each other, the risk, the passion, the fragility. They weren't just hikers, they were dreamers, and dreams don't die quietly. But our journey's not over yet. You've seen the snow, you've felt the silence, but there's one more piece still missing, one more mystery you've yet to face, and this one lives in you. You're alone now, at least. It feels that way. You've walked through snowfields and whispered corridors. You've listened to the howling wind on Kholat Shekel and felt the weight of silence in mothers' living rooms. And yet somehow, it's this last step that feels the strangest, because now it's not about the hikers, or the Mansi, or the Soviet press. It's about you, about why this story still pulls at the edges of your attention like a half-remembered dream, why it won't let go. Theories. Let's talk about them, really talk about them. You sit on your bed, wrapped in the glow of a screen, and type in Dyatlov Pass. Scroll, click, scroll again. It's endless. Theories laid out like tarot cards. Some scientific, some not so much. First, the avalanche theory. Classic, clean, logical. A slab of snow breaks loose, flattens the tent. Panic ensues. Hypothermia follows. In 2020, some Swiss researchers even used a modified version of a frozen animation tool, Yes, the Disney movie, to simulate snowpack movement. Results seemed plausible, but here's the problem. The tent wasn't completely buried. The poles still stood upright. The hikers cut their way out, not through a collapsed entry. The slope too shallow, say critics, and the injuries way too severe for a slow-moving slab, especially the fractured ribs, the crushed skull, the missing eyes and tongue. So if not snow, then what? Some point to infrasound, a lesser known but very real phenomenon. When wind hits the mountain just right, it creates low-frequency vibrations too deep to hear, but powerful enough to induce unease, panic, even hallucinations. Could the group have fled in a sudden frenzy, not from a threat, but from their own minds turning against them? It sounds wild, but not impossible. Others circle back to radiation. After all, some of the clothing tested showed abnormal levels. 2 of the hikers had worked in nuclear facilities. Coincidence, contamination, or something they encountered on the mountain. And then there's the secret weapons theory. Whispers about parachute mines, rocket tests, even sonic weapons. The Ural Mountains were not just beautiful, they were strategic, close enough to military bases, remote enough for things to go unnoticed. A few documents hint at strange lights in the sky. One investigator later claimed the bodies had burns consistent with blast trauma, but those claims were quietly scrubbed from the official files. Historians still argue whether any military tests occurred in that area during February 1959. The records are muddy, redacted, some say erased, but even without proof, the theory lingers because the unknown, paired with government silence, creates a petri dish for speculation. Of course, you can't mention Dyatlov without the UFO theory. Lights, orbs, heat signatures. A photo from the recovered camera shows a blurred streak in the sky. Another shows what looks like figures standing in the snow. Skeptics scoff, but believers lean forward. One even suggested that the group saw something they weren't supposed to see and were silenced deliberately. And then there's the Mansi curse theory, more cultural than factual, but it has its own eerie draw. Some say the group disturbed a sacred site. Others say the name Kola Tsyachol, which translates roughly to Mountain of the Dead, should have been a warning. But there's no record of the Mansi harming outsiders. In fact, they assisted with the search. Still, the idea of the land itself being hostile, sacred, untouchable, has a certain chilling poetry. Yet the wildest theory, some say it wasn't any of these things. Some say it was them, the group itself. That interpersonal conflict boiled over. That paranoia or illness took hold. That love triangles. Resentment, cabin fever, something unspoken unfolded in the dark. But there's no evidence of that either. No signs of struggle in the tent. No injuries consistent with fighting. Just flight. So here you are, at the edge of all the facts, staring into the fog where history loses its outline. The truth is in there, somewhere, but it's wearing a dozen masks. And maybe that's what makes it stick. Because you realize something now, we don't obsess over stories like Dyatlov because we expect an answer. We obsess because we recognize the fragility of control, how quickly comfort turns to chaos, how a tent becomes a tomb, how brave, brilliant people students, engineers, future scientists can vanish into the teeth of a mountain and leave behind nothing but questions. And if it could happen to them. But here's where the story changes, because in 2019, a new expedition tried to retrace the group's steps, not just with science, but with heart. They wanted to feel what Dyatlov's team felt. The cold, the camaraderie, the dread. They pitched their tent in the same place. They shared stories over canned meat. They climbed into sleeping bags, knowing how the original trip ended. And they came back. That's the gift of history. Even in its darkest corners, it reminds us not just of how people died, but why they lived. So now, here in the quiet dark, you picture them one last time. Xena laughing at a snowball, Rustam tinkering with the camp stove, Lyudmila writing in her journal by flashlight, Dyatlov, eyes focused on the map, already planning the next trip. They were real, not symbols, not case studies, real. And whatever happened that night, whether it was nature, madness, the state, or something stranger, they deserve more than theories. They deserve remembrance. And so you take a breath, let it out slowly, because here's where we slow down. The wind dies down across the peaks. The snow still falls, but gentler now, like powdered sugar over the spine of the earth. The campsite fades from view. The mystery lingers, Yes, but softly now, like an unanswered lullaby. You close your eyes and picture a frozen tent in the moonlight. Not torn, not broken, just still, the way it might have looked the day before it all changed. 9 friends, one dream, a path through the white unknown, and maybe, in the quiet of this moment, you understand them a little more. The courage it took, the risk, the trust, the joy of being small against something so vast, the choice to keep going anyway. Let it rest now. Let the snow cover the questions, just for a little while. Tomorrow, you can chase answers again, but tonight, we leave the mountain. You are safe, you are warm, and the mystery will wait. Sweet dreams.